So welcome back to Hacker Warehouse TV, a great show for InfoSec neighbors. I'm your host, Troy Brown, and today we have a very special guest. We're talking to Federal Trade Commission lawyer, Terrell McSweeny, about the future of information security research. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's amazing to have you here. Commissioner McSweeny, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I am a Federal Trade Commissioner.
That's awesome. So our first question is, why don't you just go ahead and give us an overview of what your talk was, like an elevator version of your talk this year.
Absolutely. Well, the Federal Trade Commission is a consumer protection agency, and one of the things we do is protect consumer data security. And as a result, we bring cases sometimes against companies if they don't have reasonable security processes in place that result in some sort of breach or private sensitive information being made public. You might remember the Ashley Madison breach. So there we had 36 million user records made public. These were sensitive records, including personal information about married people trying to be on a social network to conduct affairs. So you can imagine that was information they wanted to keep private. We looked at the security practices of the company that led to that disclosure and found that they were unfair. So those are the kinds of cases that we can bring as an agency. But we also spend a lot of time working directly with the hacker and research community to understand how technology is working, where some of the problems are. That informs our cases, of course, but also the guidance that we put out to business about what good security practices are. So the other part of our mission is a public education mission. What are good security practices? What should we be doing collectively to make sure that we have a more secure environment for consumers? That's
amazing. And you guys are there as the guardians of our everyday consumers, and you have guidance out there. Is that guidance is for different sectors, right?
It's interesting. In the US, we have a variety of different approaches depending on the sensitivity of the information.
Okay.
So at the Federal Trade Commission, we have a cybersecurity rule for children's information in the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act that gave us rulemaking authority for children's information and how it has to be handled and secured.
Okay.
Similarly, there are rules in HIPAA around HIPAA-covered institutions and health information.
Absolutely.
And in Graham-Leach-Bliley, there's the safeguards rule for financial institutions and financial information. These are all a little bit different. There isn't really a broad, across all sectors rule on data security, though, and that's where the FTC comes in. We have a general authority that we use to protect consumers from unreasonable security. Basically called unfair deceptive acts and practices is the legal term.
Okay.
And we've been using that to try to create some incentives in the marketplace to improve consumer security. Now, if you think about it, a 100-year-old consumer protection agency is only in this business because consumers have moved from a brick and mortar world to a digital one. And they're now consuming not just on the internet, but we're wearing wearables, we're hooking up our houses full of IoT devices. So we have a lot of consumer-facing products, and that's why we're concerned about the level of security around them.
That's amazing. So you've just kind of evolved with the process over the years.
Right.
So we looked at your bio, and there was a couple terms in there that we thought were very interesting. And it talks about security by design, privacy by design, and data ethics in terms of regulation, enforcement, and research. Can you elaborate a little bit on some of those terms, like data ethics and what you mean by privacy by design?
Okay, so these concepts are the concepts that we've evolved over the last 25 years of looking at how to protect consumers in an online world at the FTC. Privacy by design means building with privacy values in mind at the beginning of the product lifecycle, not tacking on privacy through some notice policy at the end. So making sure that what you say you're doing with consumer information and how you're offering choices about when it's being collected and used is putting the consumer first. Security by design is also a similar framework. It's about creating a process in your organization that is focused on the security of the products and services that you're providing. It's about training and responsiveness and responsible disclosure programs. It's pretty similar to the NIST critical infrastructure framework.
Right.
Data ethics and governance by design are concepts that I'm actually just sort of playing around with, but I think that we can develop to also be process-oriented structures and organizations where people are making responsible choices about what information needs to be collected and how it's going to be used. There's so many times companies get into trouble because they're just collecting too much sensitive information, like geolocation that's very precise. I was just sitting in a talk that Cash Hill is giving that says the internet knows I'm pregnant, and it's about all the different apps that she was using during her pregnancy, and they're collecting access to people's contacts and things like that. Yeah. Once you start collecting that information, you have an obligation to secure it under our standards. And so some of the conversations that we like to try to have with companies is think about what information you're collecting, why you're collecting it, whether you need to collect it, how long you need to keep it, and whether it really makes sense for your business. So this gets into governance by design. Ultimately, as the tech gets smarter, you can think, well, I also need people minding the autonomous technology that's making decisions as well.
That's really amazing. And with the data ethics, are you creating guidance for that?
Well, we're in the process. I mean, it's still very early, right? Data ethics is something that I think there's a lot of really good academic work on, and there's some organizations that are really trying to be thoughtful about it. For me, what it means is thinking about where the red lines are around data use in our country already. So we have, in the brick and mortar world, laws against discrimination, laws that protect equal opportunity, laws that are civil rights laws, laws that protect access to credit and housing. Now, I think those are the norms that we've all agreed on as being very important to protect. We're not always translating them into the digital space. So this is what we need to be talking about when we think about ethics and governance is, okay, if your tech is discriminating against people, even though it's neutral on its face, what do you do at that point? Well, hopefully you figure out why it happened and fix it, right?
Yeah, it's so interesting, very interesting. What role do hackers play in information security? Like here at DEF CON, how do you think that they fit in that whole?
Well, this is my fourth DEF CON, and I was originally introduced to DEF CON because the FTC was running a contest here to try to develop better solutions for robocalls, which are those electronic calls you get that do not call us. These are super annoying. Yeah.
Yes.
So we've come a couple of times, and it's because the security researcher, the hacker community, has a very similar mission to the Federal Trade Commission. We want to know, how is the thing working that people are using? Is it doing what they say it's doing or something completely different?
Yes.
Does it have vulnerabilities in it that people should be aware of that need to be patched? And this is the kind of research that's presented here at DEF CON, but it's the kind of research that a lot of hackers do. So we actually have brought cases based on information that we've gotten from security researchers about products.
Really? How do you see the future of the FTC and the research community working together in the future compared to how it is now?
So I hope we're going to continue to have really good working relationship because the Federal Trade Commission is an agency that has a similar mission to white hat hackers. Mm-hmm. We get along really well in partnership. And one of the things we've been trying to do is build more in-house capabilities and bring researchers into the FTC in our OTech office. Yeah. So one of the things that I'm hoping we can do in the future is really expand that so that we have even more researchers in the agency itself, even for short-term stints, helping us with our mission, because I think it helps us develop very personal relationships with people in the hacker community, and it helps us build trust, and that is so important.
True. We were talking earlier with some groups about the skills gap and how this is a great place for recruitment and finding the people that have a specialty in that niche that you're looking for.
Yeah.
So that's really smart.
Well, we're all consumers, and so I do like to make a push for working at the Federal Trade Commission. The skills that hackers have are in demand by everybody, by industry, by government, by our national security agencies, and that is all really worthy work. But I just want to put everyone on the radar the idea of consumer protection as a good way to serve in the government as well. It's not the same thing as being at the National Security Agency, but it's pretty rewarding work.
So this is an interesting question. It says, who is Dewey? I'm hoping you know what that means. Yeah.
All right, Dewey. Dewey is a mascot that we used in consumer education literature starting in the 1990s that was trying to help kids be safe online. And he's kind of a lovable critter. Okay. He worked about as well as mascots have worked in the technology and software industry.
Oh yeah, like the paperclip.
Not that well, yeah. So I don't know that we even use Dewey anymore, but we were talking about him today because we were doing a retrospective of over the 25 years of DEF CON, what has the FTC been doing that is related to technology, security, fraud, and privacy? And what we found is that, in fact, when you look 25 years to the present, our first cases around consumer privacy and data security and online fraud and the World Wide Web also started the same time as DEF CON. So we're just trying to give a little bit of perspective that we've been kind of doing the same work over the same period of time, and I hope that we're continuing to forge a better and better partnership.
That's really interesting. I mean, so it's 20 years of experience. They kind of came together about 5 years ago when you first started, and it sounds like you have a bright future ahead with working with DEF CON.
As we connect more and more things in our daily lives, there are more and more things that need to be secured. So there's no shortage of work for all of us to do.
Well, you talked about recruiting or working at the FTC. What really inspired you to do what you're doing at the FTC?
Well, I'm a consumer, so it's pretty rewarding to be in consumer protection. We spend a lot of our time not just on privacy and data security, but also on fraud and marketing practices and advertising practices, ways that people are being scammed out of their money. And one of the things that we can do is get their money back when they're harmed. So I can't tell you how rewarding it is to be in the government and be sending people checks. Last year, we actually got $14 billion back for American consumers from fraud, scams, deception, and other practices in the market.
I had no idea that was one of the things.
Well, it's sad that it was that big, right? But
yeah, exactly. So what career advice would you give to people starting out and they want to be in a position that you're in?
First of all, we are always looking for people who have computer science, technical, security background. So getting that training and having that interest is a terrific start to begin with. I'm an attorney by training, so a lot of our workforce at the FTC are lawyers because we're bringing cases that are legal cases. We have some wonderful new talented attorneys that are both computer scientists and attorneys, and that's like awesome set of credentials.
Awesome. That's a good mix.
It's a dangerous mix. But we're also hiring people who are researchers and technologists as well, because we value that skill set and the perspective that's brought by people who know how the technology works. That I cannot underscore enough, right? Yeah. In DC, in the government, we sometimes are in the position of making policy without necessarily knowing how the tech works, and that's a big mistake. We need to know how the tech works in order to think of the right solutions.
Yeah, no, well said, well said. What's your favorite part about DEF CON?
Oh my gosh. I love the villages.
Yeah.
I was super psyched to go to the voting machine village this time. The first time voting machines are at DEF CON, and that's partly thanks to the exemption in the DMCA statute, so I was like super psyched to see that research being done.
Okay.
I have always really enjoyed it. I usually visit Roots when I'm here. I'm a parent, and I think that's super cool that exists. I can't wait to bring my kids. And I love the talks, I usually try to pick talks that, since I'm a lawyer and not a technical person, aren't too technical for me. Okay. And I always learn something new, usually something pretty troubling as a consumer about how something's operating.
Right.
But for me, it's a chance to just sit down and kind of look at what people are finding and look behind the curtain a little bit at how some of these things are working. Not all of them are so bad that they run afoul of the FTC, but it is very eye-opening just to have a time to sit down and think about the choices that we're making in our daily lives around what we're using and when we're exchanging our information, some of it very personal, for services, and whether we should weigh that and think about that while we're doing it. So,
definitely a good time to
and it's the people, right? I mean, it's the people.
Yeah.
I just love the people that I see here, and it's fun to hang out.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a question in here about net neutrality. So if you could just speak a little bit on net neutrality and just kind of open.
Sure, net neutrality. Thoughts, All right, so we're having this big debate again in Washington over how to protect the open internet. Okay. The idea, of course, of net neutrality is that you shouldn't have to pay to have access to the network, that there should be non-discrimination of data packets traveling to consumers. Okay. Some of us believe that's really, really important because there's so much innovation at the edge that needs to reach consumers, that if we have a situation where there's blocking and paid access, that you're only going to privilege a very small number of companies that can afford to do that, and that the smaller startups will be harmed.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people. The current chairman of the FCC is not one of those people. So in the last administration, there was a rule the Federal Communications Commission wrote to protect non-discrimination. It's called the Open Internet Order. Okay. The new FCC, it's confusing, these acronyms,
it's okay.
Is in the process of maybe unwinding that.
Okay.
And it has me very concerned because I think we'd be better off as consumers and that innovators will be better off if we have a strong, clear set of rules that protect non-discrimination on the internet.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
Sure.
It's actually a really clear way to put it, and excellent. How do you think the increased coverage in information security topics and hacking over the last year or two has affected your work or people's perception of information security?
You know, I really feel, I've been at the FTC now for about 4 years, and I have really seen a change in how American consumers are thinking about the choices they're making about their privacy and their security. I think there's starting to be a much bigger awareness among ordinary, non-technical Americans that there could be insecure things in their home that could have consequences. I think people are starting to think a little bit more about whether they want to trade their information for free services, where it's going, and how it's being used. And for me, that's a really promising thing, because first and foremost, as a consumer protection person, I want to have educated consumers out there. You know, that's consumers. The people who are using the products and buying the products are their first best line of defense, you know? So the more we can do to have people be aware of checking to see if things need to be updated, understanding what systems they're using, the better off we're all going to be. I'm really excited because this week we just announced the winner of our Home IoT Inspector Challenge, $25,000 cash prize for an app that's going to help people just see what IoT they have on their system in their home, and hopefully whether it needs to be updated or patched, or whether something is available for it. Just having that tool that regular people like me can use in our homes to help keep current, I think is a very valuable thing.
And with that app, then tell them, hey, you have a device that maybe is doing too much or is crossing the boundary?
I don't know. I think the app will initially be able to say there's an update available for that or not.
Okay, that's great.
But yeah, in the future, it'd be great to have things that are even easier to figure out if your IoT's like hijacked into a DDoS attack. Right? We're not quite there yet for most users. And one of the things that I really try to talk about in the policy discussion around this is that it is not going to work for any of us if we're relying on end user consumers for all of this updating and everything. That's just a recipe for disaster. I mean, call up your mom and dad and like walk them through like patching their router, okay? Just tell me if that's a solution that anybody wants to rely on for protecting the whole ecosystem. I think it's not.
So, and we talked a little bit earlier about how there's guidance today and there's enforcement today. There's not really a policy or a standard that, kind of like FCC, right? A product goes through FCC, it has to meet those standards. Do you ever see that coming for FTC where you say, hey, you have to meet this certain standard or else you can't put out a product or testing?
I think it would be, look, I think we already have in place guidance that is a bit like having a standard of what the security practices ought to be. And a bunch of other government agencies, NHTSA is doing this for cars, FDA is doing it for medical devices, NIST is doing it for critical infrastructure, are putting out the same kind of information. And it's all essentially the same. I think we will have situations where what is appropriate is going to vary a little bit depending on what the product is. So I can imagine how we want to handle responsible disclosure in medical devices might be a little bit different because there will be situations where something is in somebody and it's too dangerous to take it out. You know, like, and what do you do? That's different than
come on in for a hardware upgrade.
The connected toaster in your kitchen that probably shouldn't be there. But so I think we are going to need to come up with ways for there to be clear information depending on what the kind of product is. We're already trying to put that out. But there isn't any kind of comprehensive law in the United States that sets those standards. So the question's going to be, can we just rely on voluntary standards, or do we need to have some kind of real requirements in place?
That's interesting. Well, hopefully we can rely on the standards for now, and the policies and the guidance, and the researchers to really make everybody understand the right way to use things. Thanks again for talking to us today. We really appreciate you coming out. If our viewers at home want to learn more about the FTC or get involved in bridging the gap between the research community and the government, what are some of the sites they should go to check it out? All
right, well, I'm going to promote ftc.gov. No surprise there. That's our website. We have a lot of information on it. We have our Start with Security guide there. We are also soliciting input on through that initiative on what security practices ought to be. If you have information that you think we ought to know, you can file a complaint with us on that website. So that's our system for receiving complaints. And then if you're just a person who's worried about a breach or some information or identity theft, we also run a site called identitytheft.gov that runs you step by step through a remediation process if you're worried that someone is using parts of your identity or you're having an issue like that as well. So we have a bunch of websites, but they have a lot of really useful information on them.
Awesome. Well, we have links to all that information in the description below of this video.
Great.
So you heard it, the FTC website, the identity theft website, and also I would imagine if you're recruiting, there's probably some open positions at the FTC on there as well?
Yes, and those are usually posted on USA Jobs.
Awesome. On usajobs.com. All right. Well, if Terrell has inspired you to start participating in government, let us know in the comments below. Once again, this is Troy with Hacker Warehouse TV, and until next time, please remember, especially with the commissioner here, keep it between the laws. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.